Hi, this is my review of Ambrosia, A Gathering of Souls, the Quickstart. This is a condensed set of basic rules and a scenario for the upcoming Ambrosia role-playing game, or rather storytelling game, by Erlen van der Hagen. Ambrosia paints a pretty gritty, dark, and gloomy picture, but at the same time, it offers a lot of opportunities to create glimmers of hope. It's a dark fantasy game based on the history and lore of the Low Countries in Europe. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. Well, first of all, the PDF is free, so there's that to consider. However, the document is not bookmarked, and for a quick start that is to serve as an effective introduction into the world of Ambrosia, I think bookmarks, or at the very least hyperlinks, would have been pretty nice to navigate the PDF in an effective way. But everything is well organized and written and explained, of course. And the document actually feels quite premium because of the clean, neat graphic design and the illustrations. A lot of them are photo montages, and they really express a lot of what you would expect to find in the stories that you shape in the setting of Ambrosia. Now let's talk about the contents. First, you have an introduction, because the main focus of Ambrosia is to be a storytelling game. There are some rules and mechanical elements that bring some randomness and excitement to different tests and checks, but you also have mechanisms to have control over the fate of your character, as you will see when I talk about the system. So, Ambrosia takes place in the Alberlands, a stretch of land bordered by the Salis Sea on one side and the Morvig Mountains on the other. Almost 1500 years ago, there were these powerful magic users that decided to wield dark and forbidden rites, ceremonies, rituals, and they became a powerful invading force. However, there was this charismatic leader called Argonius from southern Carthagia. He united all of the Aberlandic tribes and defeated these dark wizards, bringing peace to the Alberlands. He created a vast empire. He was the emperor, and after he died, he was known as the God Emperor. However, with his death, the Alberlands became divided once more. Nobody accepted anyone else as a new emperor, and the sacerdotal state of Carthagia took advantage of this. The pontifex created the Argonius Church and took control of the Aberlands. However, later on, a boy appeared by the name of Pyrrhic, and he claimed to have been visited by a vision of Argonius, tasking him with rebuilding the old empire. So he gathered an army, and through the use of force, as it works throughout history, he persuaded the pontifex so that Pyrrhic could become the new emperor, and he established a new holy empire. So the empire, in order to rule, perhaps with an iron fist, over the Alberlands, established itself as the Holy Carthaginian Empire, persecuting any other cults that went against this new religion. So, as you can see, there is quite a bit of a religious flavor or theme in Ambrosia. You have different cults, but as you can see, the Holy Carthaginian Empire has the advantage when it comes to the established religion, and there can be conflicts of interest related to different forms of worshipping powers and spirits and such. Now, life in the Elverlands is quite difficult, especially for commoners. There are some advantages, both natural and political and social, but there are also many disadvantages. Because, for example, the average life expectancy among humans is about 45. And girls are expected to be married at an age of 12 years of age. So it's a very difficult life, especially because a girl is not mature at that time to have a family. And many the kids are considered to be adults at the age of 14. So as you can see, it's a life where there is unexpected and sudden death at every corner. And like I was saying, there are these noble houses and commoners are expected to respect them. However, if a crime is committed against a noble, the commoner has virtually almost no way of winning the trials, because everything is fixed in favor of the nobles. In fact, if a commoner or peasant asks for a trial by combat, then the nobleman is fully equipped in the best armor and the best swords or weaponry available, while the commoner has to fight with no armor and just using a stick. So, and this feels a bit... There are some moments in Ambrosia that the game feels quite philosophical and perhaps educational, because, for example, in modern times, someone who has more money has quite a bit of an advantage when winning trials. So the modern armor could be considered better lawyers or ways to bribe the relevant powers in the trial. And so you see that the situation hasn't changed that much. But on the other hand, nobles are supposed to protect the commoners, but as I was telling you, this is a dark fantasy game, so this is rather the exception rather than the norm. So it's very difficult if you create a character that is a commoner to get his hands on quality metal weapons and armor. They are quite rare. So any type of character that you create in the world of Ambrosia has its own challenges and advantages. You just have to play to your own strengths. It's also quite difficult for commoners to get fresh meat. It's as if they wanted to turn them into vegetarians, because they are only allowed to eat vegetables and fruits. It is forbidden to hunt in different forests throughout the land, because those forests are property of the noble lords. And so it's you can be punished by death if you are caught hunting in those forests. If an old man considers a commoner to have performed some minor deeds such as stealing, that commoner will probably lose his hand or both of his hands. And so the only opportunity for commoners to get fresh meat is hunting rats or pigeons that they find in their houses, if they manage to catch them. So you have all the information, the setting. As you can see, it's quite bleak. You have information on how life goes on the situation and opportunities for adventure, because you don't necessarily only have to create noblemen and commoners. You can also create free men, which are not tied to noble houses and are not subjected to the troubles that the problems that commoners have to face in their everyday lives, because these free men are usually travelers. However, that also means that they do not enjoy the little protection that noblemen can offer them, and commoners do not respect these free men as much as they would respect a nobleman. Now let's talk a bit about the mechanical side of the game. You have 3 ability scores: physical, mental, and social. And from this, 6 more are derived. From the physical ability score, you have strength and dexterity. From mental, you have knowledge and intuition. And from social, you have charisma and appearance. So these scores are used in different checks throughout the game. It's basically a very simple mechanic in which you roll a 10-sided die and you add the relevant modifiers. One of the cool things about Ambrosia is that when you level up your skills, your ability scores also grow. So it makes sense because, for example, maybe your character is a lumberjack or maybe a hunter, and you use your tools and your weapons, and that means your muscles will also develop as you become better at using your tools of the trade. So it makes a lot of sense. So ability checks are carried out in a very simple way with these secondary ability scores, but the primary scores are used as extra effort. Extra effort is basically a way to have a bit more control over your character's fate, because, for example, maybe you have to make a check with a difficulty of 14, and you roll your 10-sided die, you add your relevant modifiers depending on their circumstances and based on your derivative scores, but maybe you are short by 2 points. Maybe you need, as I was telling you, you need a 14 and you actually rolled a 12. You could use this limited resource, which is extra effort. Perhaps you use 2 points of extra effort to raise it to 14, and therefore you become successful in that check. However, you have to be very intelligent as to how you're going to use this resource, because this only regenerates during certain moments in the game. And you are never sure when the game master or storyteller is going to bring out some very dangerous and risky situations, and if you are constantly using your extra effort without putting thought into long-term situations, you could be thinking, oh no, I already spent all of my extra effort in those other checks, I wish I had a bit more extra effort right now. So you have to be quite intelligent in the way you play the story. And as I was saying, everything is resolved in the basic way. You roll a 10-sided die and you add the relevant modifiers. If you're in a contest of sorts, maybe you want to hide from someone, or maybe you are participating in combat, it's a contested check to see who rolls better, who rolls the highest. When you carry out attacks, the relevant stats or ability scores that you use depend on the weapon that you are using. If you are using carving or blunt weapons, you'll have to make a strength check. But if you are using piercing or ranged weapons, you carry out a dexterity check. So as you can see, you could play as a dexterity-based character. You just have to keep in mind what types of weapons and gear you're going to be using and carrying. The same goes with the difficulty class or difficulty check that is needed during combat, because, for example, maybe an opponent is attacking you with a mace, so that opponent will make a strength check, but maybe your character wants to dodge or wants to do some elegant parry and riposte with a more finer weapon, perhaps like a rapier, just pushing the weapon to the side and letting all the weight of the mace pass by. And then you would do a dexterity check. And there are some other situations in which the check or the difficulty class to beat is more static, for example, when someone is using shields. So I think this is a very nice way of adding a bit of a simulationist touch to the storytelling side of things. That is, this is not an exact simulation as, let's say, Hackmaster, but because this is a storytelling game, this mechanic works perfectly in harmony with what this game wants to offer. And so you have more information on how to carry out different checks, but what I found really fun when it comes to the failure when carrying out different checks is the damage mechanic. Because, let me show you this image. You have these little circles right here. And let's say that you are fighting an opponent and that opponent was actually successful in striking your character with, let's say, a short sword or an axe. Then you will be dealt an amount of damage, but you do not feel all of the circles with a dot when indicating damage. You just mark the exact number of a circle, because, for example, maybe the opponent dealt 5 points of damage to your character. Then you would count from left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so it's the fifth circle, and you place a mark. And later on, maybe you get attacked by an enemy with, let's say, a dagger, and it only deals, let's say, 3 points of damage, and you count 1, 2, 3, and now you have another dot with a mark. So as you can see, those represent cuts and bruises. So your character could have several minor injuries. However, what happens if they hit that same circle twice? Maybe you got attacked with that dagger and that dagger cuts you again. And so the damage goes on to severe trauma. And as you can see, light trauma gives you a penalty of -1 to all of your checks, and severe trauma will give you a negative modifier of -2. So this represents how a wound can get worse, or how superficial wounds or trifle wounds become a nuisance, or sometimes an obstacle significant enough for you to suffer greater damage. Because in the case of the dagger, maybe the first attack you blocked it with your forearm and you got like a bit of a gash in your forearm, but maybe you were clumsy and you blocked again with that forearm, and now the cut is deeper. Or maybe that gash distracted you, the pain, maybe you got sweat in that wound, or maybe your arm started to feel a bit numb, and you lowered your guard, and now the wound ended up in your torso. So that's how wounds become worse and worse. This is actually a really gritty game. As you can see, in combat, the negative modifiers will start to pile up. And when it comes to severe trauma, you have to perform a check that is affected by those negative modifiers to keep yourself from passing out from the shock of the pain. And there's also the consideration that if you get attacked with a more dangerous weapon, let's say a huge Zweihander or some battle axe, maybe it deals, let's say, 11 or 12 points of damage, it would go right to severe trauma, because it makes sense. Just imagine if someone were to cut you one of those huge weapons. It's quite difficult. You better have good armor, quality armor, to try to resist that, to mitigate that damage. But what if the damage gets to incurable trauma, or even critical trauma? Well, the wounds become worse and worse to the point that your character can be killed, and you even have an incurable physical trauma table to see what type of incurable wound was inflicted upon you. Because, for example, maybe you lose your left eye and now you have a combat penalty and a general intuition penalty. Or maybe you got hit on the head with a warhammer or something, and now you're partially deaf, and you have a penalty to general intuition and charisma. Or maybe you lose your hand or even a leg. You better get that peg leg ready for that. And the same applies to other contests of a different nature. For example, maybe you're performing some powerful and dangerous magic spell, and you suffer mental trauma. Maybe you suffer amnesia, and you start suppressing memories. The game master can play around with this, and because of the general disorientation, you have a penalty to knowledge and intuition. But maybe this mental damage resulted in a phobia, so now you have an irrational fear of specific situations, and you have a penalty related to that fear. Many mental traumas are great excuses for the game master or storyteller to play around with your character, with the events that will happen and the dangerous and challenging situations that you will face. There's even a way that you will suffer social damage. Maybe someone is blackmailing you, or performing some sort of slander, or calling you a coward or a fool, and backs it up with some convincing arguments. Then your reputation would be quite damaged. And so you have information on different bonuses and penalties and actions. And one very interesting thing in combat is that the initiative is static. So it's recommended that the players sit around the table in the order of initiative, because that's going to be the same throughout every combat encounter. And every action that you take in combat takes a number of points. So it's not going to be the same in terms of speed when you use a lighter weapon or you perform some more complicated action like casting a spell. So for example, if you put on a helmet, it takes 5 points. But maybe you just want to open or close a door, that takes you only 2 points. So every combat round, a character can spend 10 action points. So you could do a lot of minor things or carry out just one or two very complicated actions, depending on what you want your character to perform or carry out. When it comes to healing and resting, all light traumas are healed overnight. And the character can spend 3 points of primary ability score, that is extra effort, to convert a severe trauma to the corresponding light trauma. And the player rolls a 10-sided die to replenish a number of spent primary ability score points. So as you can see, there is a way for your character to heal himself or herself as the adventure goes on. You also have information on different healing methods, such as, of that particular time, like bloodletting, key cutting, surgery, etc. You have a guide to create your own character. However, it feels just like a taste of what you can accomplish with Ambrosia. You will need the full core rulebook. This Quickstart only gives you like a small taste or a glimpse of what Ambrosia can offer, and you can create a character of almost any type within the setting. You could be a human from a noble house, or you could be a commoner, as I was telling you, or a freeman. You could also be a dwarf. And dwarves and elves get the folklore treatment in this game. They do not feel like folk that you would find in your everyday lives. They appear depending on the situation. Dwarves are a bit more social with humans. They have different covenants and agreements related to commerce and mutual protection. So it's a bit more common to see a dwarf around the setting. But elves are considered almost like animals. In fact, an elf can actually hunt in the forest because they are considered, for example, like wolves. However, that also means that if there is an overpopulation of elves, they can be hunted just like animals. And you have details on the different noble houses, on their rivalries and alliances between each other. You have the background information for dwarves and elves that I was telling you. And you have some examples on the types of human nobles and dwarves and elves that you can create, their different physical, mental, and social stats. You also have information on flaws, talents, and skills, and how derivative scores apply. You have all the information that you need to use the different character sheets. So this quick start with the examples presented, although they are quite superficial, it will probably give you about, let's say that you play a lot, maybe a month of entertainment. Although this the scenario contained here will provide a complete evening of entertainment, you can use all of the other elements to, for example, the pre-generated characters as examples to create your own characters and have different adventures with this quick start. But as I was telling you, I calculate that in about a month you will probably want more. Now, something that is quite thematic within the religious context of Ambrosia is that despite there being many cults, there is a strong weight when it comes to the immortal soul of the characters. So no matter who your character worships, there are a number of sins that are considered traps in which your character can fall into and therefore become more vulnerable to the powers of the dark, evil spirits and such. So for example, if your character constantly carries out actions related to selfishness, gluttony, pride, sloth, wrath, and impiety, your character will start getting closer and closer to the dark side or the netherworld, to put it in a way. You have all the details on levels and experience points, as I was telling you, all the details concerning the different religions and cults. If you want, your character can actually become like a free thinker with no attachment to any cult, but then your character is an apostate, and although you have that freedom of not having to obey or become dominated by the different religions and cults, you are not affiliated with any one of those, so that's a vulnerability at times. And you see the differences of different cults because, for example, the elves worship this entity known as the beast. and you see how religions clash ideologically. This can also be opportunities for adventures and combat. You have details on treasure, that is coinage, all the information concerning magic, because you have different schools or disciplines of magic. You have necromancy, pseudomancy, skydomancy. You have chronomancy, although that one is surrounded in myth and legend. It's not that common. Morphomancy, alchemy. So you could have a group of different characters who engage in very different esoteric practices. And you have sample spells and rituals, because for example we have the ghostly sight of necromancy. This spell allows a necromancer to see the spirit world. And then you have imitation from pseudomancy. Pseudomancers master the art of gaining in seconds what others have taken years to accomplish. To accomplish. This spell allows you to copy a skill or talent from another character. So this is a very flexible spell, and you have other spells such as Magic Salve, which allows you to fly. It's based around that, the legendary ointment of witches that allows you to fly, and then you have transmutation, etc. Now when it comes to the monsters, you have a small bestiary, and these monsters, as I was telling you, they feel more folkloric, even though a lot of them could be considered common in many fantasy games. They are quite important and quite lethal at all levels, because even though a character can level up as the chronicle goes on, they are still quite vulnerable. They level up in resources rather than in a sense of invincibility. So if you play like a fantasy game like Pathfinder and all of that, your character almost feels like a superhero, but here your character is vulnerable almost all of the time. So you could have a party of adventurers with characters of levels 1, 4, 6, and they will still feel like they are playing at the same vulnerability level, to express it in a way. So when it comes to the monsters, you're going to find kobolds and ossards, which are they hide themselves in rivers, streams, and brooks, and prey upon those that pass by those areas and jump on their backs without them noticing. You also have some other bizarre creatures such as the bishop fish, which is a humanoid fish with a pointy shark-like head. And you also have some other things that resemble like nymphs or nereids, and then you have other things like the peluda, which is quite funny because in Spanish peluda means hairy, like a hairy beast. And the peluda is the greatest among the dragons, a feared water creature with a snake's tail, a body resembling a porcupine, and tortoise-like paws. And all of these monsters have different abilities. Some of them can breathe fire, some of them can go berserk, some of them are ethereal, some of them have gills or they have night vision, and so on. Now when it comes to the scenario, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything. In this scenario feels a bit more on the story arc side of things. That is, this is not exactly a sandbox scenario. It feels slightly railroady at times, but there is still flexibility to handle a few off the rail situations. This scenario is a perfect example on how you can take a classic fantasy monster or folklore monster and handle that monster's customs or way of acting as the central point for an adventure. In fact, I think this scenario is a very good one-shot scenario, because there are some developments and conclusions that, even though they can be modified, I think they will lose a bit of their impact if you do not handle it as a one-shot. So this is the perfect introductory scenario for Ambrosia. So, in fact, it's quite linked to the pre-generated characters that you get. You have a male and a female version of each character, so there is a lot of freedom as to the type of group of adventurers that you want to have, and you have their character sheets, their background information, and so forth. And so it's quite easy to tell that the chronicles and the stories that you will create with Ambrosia are intimately tied to the background of your character. Because your characters, the way that the character sheets are built, they have a lot of room to carry out intrigues, plots, and strange revelations throughout the different chronicles and adventures, because you could have the front side of the character sheet where it doesn't show the name of your character, it shows the nickname and some very superficial details, but maybe your character belongs to a specific noble house that nobody else even suspects of you belonging to that house, and you can keep that information hidden at the back of your character sheet, so you can reveal, if you wish, that information throughout the chronicles. And so there's a lot of opportunity, for example, to perform some sort of betrayal in the party if you want to handle like a competitive type of story or chronicle. Or maybe it's just there so that sometimes your character that everyone thought that he was like a peasant or commoner, suddenly he reveals himself to be a prince of one of the noble houses. So that's really nice. It adds a lot of flavor and depth to the type of stories that you can build with Ambrosia. So what do I think of this Quickstart? Oh, and before I forget, I also forgot to mention that at the end of the PDF you have a Spotify list, so you can use different tunes and songs with the encounters of the scenario, so that's pretty nice, and it seems that this is going to be continued in all of the chronicles and materials that will be produced for Ambrosia. So what do I think of the Ambrosia Quickstart? I think that in its presentation, it feels like a premium experience with all of those awesome illustrations and the photo montages and the Spotify list of songs. It feels quite premium, but as I was telling you, this is limited in its enjoyment in that it provides an evening of entertainment. But if you want to perhaps use this quick start for a couple of months, I don't think it will be good enough for that. Maybe perhaps for a month, if you play once a week, or perhaps 2 or 3 times a month, maybe you can extend it to that, but it will really whet your appetite for the core rulebook. And Erland has revealed that Ambrosia will have just one single core book. You won't be buying any other, the advanced, the rules for Ambrosia or the companion for Ambrosia. It's just one core rulebook that contains everything that you need to play, and the support that Ambrosia will receive will be through stories and chronicles. So if you like those RPGs that feel complete from the very start, this is probably the game for you. I think it holds a lot of potential. This quick start only gives you a small taste, so I cannot give you my complete opinion on the game, but for what this quick start presents, I think Ambrosia is turning out to be it has the potential to become a very powerful storytelling game that focuses more on the story of the characters as they integrate into any sort of chronicle that you want to tell. And I also like that a free effort detail that will allow you to save your character from certain death if you are intelligent when spending that resource. I also forgot to mention that when you level up, you get karma points, then you can also use them to influence your rolls. I also forgot to mention that the effort, you can spend 1 point of effort to make rerolls, one single reroll that is. So as you can see, even though there is randomness in this game, there is a way to mitigate that randomness. And I really found the damage system quite fun, as you have several cuts and bruises, and you can still push your luck that maybe you won't get hurt as much and you can keep on fighting, but maybe you become really unlucky and you fail your check and your character passes out from the pain. Quite simulationist for a storytelling game, if you ask me. That's really nice. Thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.